Hey guys, I'm Katie Room from Periapsis Press, and today I am going to do an episode of The Signal, which if you're new to the channel or whatever, The Signal is the series where I actually take a discussion topic and we discuss it. So I'm just going to say a quick hello to the chat. Hi to Johnny Douglas and Silent Unseen, Doug Wise, Fresh Forged Films, Patrick, and A.S. Brunert. Thank you guys so much for coming. Sometimes I get on a roll here, so if you guys have a lot of stuff to say in the chat, I might get a little bit behind. Bear with me. All right. I'm William Jeffrey Rankin. Hi. So today I'm going to talk about what is Iron Age. It's a topic that keeps coming up, but there were two interesting conversations about this on Twitter, and then another interesting conversation in a video from TJ Lombardi. So I thought that I would finally gather my thoughts and present, I guess, my perspective on the Iron Age, which is quite a bit different from a lot of creatives. And it's because of my literature background. So I am interested to see what you guys think about what I think. Just like usual with the Signal episodes, I'm going to start with indie news that's relevant to the reviews that I've done on my website. So just want to let you guys know that we are still intending to do Paladin Unbound for the Iron Age book discussion. We just haven't picked a date yet. My book was supposed to come today. I really delayed on ordering it. The Black Crown was supposed to come today too, so I'm a little bit like, about that. Oh, hi to Skunk's Workshop. Thank you for coming. So if you haven't started, or if you are still reading it and we're just wondering if we were still intending to, yes, we are, with Thanksgiving and then December, right, coming. We just haven't picked a date yet. Something to keep an eye out for, the base book sale will be starting soon. That's hosted by Hans. And I put a link to his initial tweet about it in the description for you guys. That is a really great way to find really interesting stuff from indies that is within I think it's 99 cents or free. So a lot of stuff that I have reviewed on the website will be there. The Black Crown was launched. That's Johnny Douglas's debut novel. I did read it, got an e-arc, and I reviewed it, and that review is in Anvil issue 2. So it's not on my website yet, but I said it was a compelling epic fantasy featuring a ghoulish sorcerer, vengeful dragons, dark abominations, and of course orcs. One thing I didn't mention in this opening was like found family. Really, really wonderful character development. Bursting with intrigue and adventure. Good stuff. And then the other thing that I do before the discussion is I talk about, oh, this is still news, coming soon. Last year we did Periapsis Christmas, and this year we have collected 6 more stories. There's not, sadly, any sci-fi ones this year, but they're all fantasy adventure, fantasy or adventure. Some of them are more like spooky. Some of them are more the punching demons sort. Always good stuff. So I linked Periapsis Christmas in the description if you guys are already in the Christmas spirit. I'm an after Thanksgiving person, but you know, to each his own. Okay, another thing that I do is I talk about my upcoming review which will be Scars by J. Ishiro Finney. I really liked this. It's just a little novella. I think I actually have it behind me here. Yeah. It's a psychological fiction, which means that it explores like mental health, and the beats of the story are more about character development, and this one in particular deals with PTSD. And I just thought it was a very poignant, very well-written little story for people who are interested in that. I did talk about it a little bit on You Meet in a Tavern when I did the video with him, Matt, and he picked it up and read it, and he liked it. Oh, William Jeffrey Rankin says, so glad I saw the tweet about this. I need to tweet that we're live. David is always telling me that I need to remember to do that. There we go. Why won't it let me? What's going on? Let me try again. There. Did that. Patrick says, each year Parapsis Christmas adds another planet until you get to the wraparound cover. That would be a very simple way to visually signal this is an additional short story collection. This is last year. This is what we did. And it does actually have a wraparound cover. But yeah, we are going to be doing a variation on this because David did build out this. It is a three-dimensional space. So we'll be doing something similar for this year. All right. Okay. Discussion. And I love to hear from you guys, so bring it on. So my understanding of Iron Age has always been grounded in the idea of a zeitgeist, the age part of Iron Age, and the idea of it as a movement has been less for me about a collection of individuals who are doing this thing, right? And more about a literary movement. And that is kind of how I'm going to be talking about it today. The way that I understand Iron Age is it sort of started with books, novellas, novels, and expanded into entertainment in general. So I'm not saying that it's not those things. I'm just seeing it through the lens of particularly a literary movement. So the way that we use literary movement terminology is in talking about stories that have similar features, not in like genre context, but in more of a philosophical context. So Wikipedia says philosophical, topical, or aesthetic features, as opposed to genre or like time period. It's about providing language for comparing and discussing literary works. So it's very much like a critical apparatus type tool. And one of the things that it also talks about is that some are well defined and some are not. They're fluid, they overlap with other movements. It's very interesting. It's good stuff. I like that. I'm a lit nerd, so I like this kind of thing. But this is the context in which I'm going to be talking about it. So, brief lit history. So lit movements, brief history, brief summary, also known as why the American Lit Unit sucks the joy out of reading. We're just going to start. This is very, very broad, right? Romanticism, with an emphasis on like emotion and symbolism, particularly with like nature, going out into nature, observing nature, and having this sort of feelings about nature. It's in particular a reaction against the Enlightenment and sort of like the rational mood, I guess. Then we moved into realism, and this is where things start to get really depressing, right? So writers during this period focused on like depicting reality sort of as it is, especially in everyday life. So less in like going out into nature and feeling things, and more about the reality of life. It coincided with the rise of social movements. So like Charles Dickens, you can think of. It became more about pushing the like using the depiction of reality to push a certain sort of movement. And then we get out of realism, sort of coinciding with realism, we get naturalism, which is like scientific objectivity. This would be like White Fang, sort of detachment, and then like this idea of the futility of human striving and an indifferent universe, existentialism and social determinism. And then we move into modernism. Modernism is interesting because there's many faceted. There's a lot of different craft techniques. Stream of consciousness is a common one that we talk about. But there's also different ways that it sort of ended up applying, I guess. So it explored a lot of the post-World War, psychological damage, right? Personal alienation, cultural disruption, and loneliness, and like the century of rapid change. But it also tended to highlight sort of larger truths that transcended the personal experience. And this can come out sort of in a depressing way, like Virginia Woolf, or it could manifest sort of like Lord of the Rings, where we have universal truths that were not depressing, that were more optimistic. Obviously, this is literature movements, so Tolkien is considered genre fiction, and it goes through a little bit different. Oh man, the PowerPoint! I'll be taking notes. This is to help me stay on track. It's not really about taking notes. After modernism, and some people say we're still in modernism, but you get sort of the postmodernism movement sort of hitched to it in an ambiguous sort of where is the boundary sort of way. And that is sort of going back to some of the elements of naturalism, where it's like nihilistic, there's nothing you can do. But the application of it is in disruption, and particularly in deconstructing the literary structures. So like free verse came kind of out of that, like the idea that you could just pull things apart. And then the idea of absolute meaning is skewed. The difference between comedy and tragedy got really fuzzy. Patrick says there's some poetry where I agree with Plath, and I've got to go check an oven too. William Jeffrey Rankin mentions what is meant by craft techniques. So, like stream of consciousness is one that Virginia Woolf, William Faulkner, like those guys really utilized. I'm trying to remember. I had another example on the tip of my tongue. Yeah. Hemingway did some interesting things too in modernism, but like my point with that is just that modernism is about sort of the tone and philosophical ideals, and less about like specific craft techniques. We get a lot of people sort of trying to nail us down on like, well, what is good, right? And a lot of people online will sort of pick apart a sentence, right? Like, this is just a bad sentence, and here's how it would be written better. Or if you think this is a good sentence, then I don't even know what to say to you, right? And it's there are different techniques, different ways to write a sentence, different ways to communicate an idea that do not necessarily define the movement. That's kind of what I'm saying with that. Okay, so now I'm going to move into Iron Age. This term was made popular by Razorfist. You guys are mostly Iron Age people in the chat, so you guys know a little bit about that. The history of where Iron Age came from, right? It's like, it's not very long, right? You guys are familiar. I would say, in particular, something that sets aside Iron Age from a lot of the indie stuff that came before is the impact of the COVID lockdowns. A lot of people who previously had like thought about becoming writers or had started books really knuckled down and got stuff done during that time. And another thing that happened during the lockdowns was a lot of people who weren't creatives, some who were, came face to face with the fact that entertainment was no longer up to par, right? There was a lot more time to consume media, and the experience of being confronted with progressive ideas in a way that was more aggressive was one that took a lot of people aback. And a lot of creatives came out of that saying, well, I could do better. And they did. In particular, the Iron Age movement I see as being a reaction against postmodernism as a movement, sort of combined with the time period cultural event that's sort of been developing and came to a head during COVID. Like I just talked about, that sort of corporate committee-run storytelling where a bunch of women around a table decide on something and then they tell the director what to do, right? So in particular, the reaction is against that sort of restrictive, like politically correct, progressive propaganda, proselytizing element. Iron Age Media says, back in my day. Okay, some more elements. There is an emphasis on independent publishing because the creatives are telling stories that trad pub would not publish. People have asked, well, if an Iron Age creative or author who wrote a book was picked up by a trad pub, would they no longer be Iron Age? And I would say the answer is their experience publishing independently is that is part of the Iron Age movement, right? Being picked up by TradPub would be this highly unlikely event right now, right? But that would be a response to us saying, as audience, right, as customers, this is the kind of stuff we want. So the like hope and dream of publishing independently so that you could get picked up by TradPub is not the goal anymore. It instead is about telling these very particular stories that have a lot of elements that TradPub doesn't want. So the movement is characterized by creatives writing stories directly for a specific ideal reader in their own mind. Maybe it's themselves. Maybe there is a niche market. Maybe it's bigger than that, but it's not about appealing to some higher authority in order to gain their benevolent blessing, right? So that is my response to that question. Iron Age Media mentions Bane as Iron Age adjacent because they don't require agents and have picked up a lot of indies. Yes, they have. It's all about what that particular author creative is like their goal is. So I see the movement as being defined by that sort of starting motivation, that focus, that goal of writing a story for the sake of that story, and less as a sort of appeal to this bigger market. If they get picked up, wonderful, right? I'm fine with that. Like, I'm a reader. If someone gets picked up, that is almost guaranteeing that they're going to be doing more, and that their work is going to reach a new subset of people. Iron Age Media says they're still closer to Trad, but kind of a missing link. Sure. And then what we're talking about kind of links into that second part, prioritizing fun over messaging. There's really the emphasis is on writing stories that are entertaining. Generally, the authors avoid direct social commentary. Some of them lean a little bit harder into conservative ideals. But generally, the primary goal is to entertain and not to lecture the reader or convert them to a new political opinion. And that takes a lot of the pressure off of the reader and just allows them to escape, right? Which, I think kindly of. Last element that I'm going to talk about in particular with the Iron Age movement is the element of an integrated spiritual component to the stories. This one, obviously, Iron Age is big, and there are different people doing different things. But in general, my experience has been that these stories come from a place of greater truths exist, and virtues, morality, and human action matter and have an impact on the world, right? You can do things, and it will matter that you did those things. So that's kind of, again, away from postmodernism, away from the deconstruction of virtues in general, right? The general consensus I am experiencing from Iron Age indies is that there are virtues. There is good and evil, and the confrontation between them is important, and the characters can make an impact on that confrontation. Silent Unseen says, what an idea, entertaining for entertainment's sake. And William Jeffrey Rankin says, entertaining stories, madness. Yup. A lot of the Iron Age stories that I have enjoyed have had faith elements, either characters who are Christians or who have an earnest belief, either in sort of a traditional Christian like evangelical sense, or there's quite a few Catholics. And Kitsunche did a Saga of the Swordbreaker, which was more of a not quite Buddhist, but Chinese spirituality stuff. But the character had a genuine belief in those things, sort of stepping away from atheist characters or agnostic characters who would say, well, either you can't know or you're stupid if you think that. Yeah, Iron Age Media says, I definitely say there's a rejection of gray morality at minimum. Yeah, that would be my experience. I would say, Skunk's Workshop, I would say as far as anti-heroes, I have seen some anti-heroes, but it has always been tempered with this sort of world building element that there is like a universal truth, right? I would say for a well-known example, Razorfist's book, the main character is kind of an anti-hero, but the way that The Long Moonlight ends is kind of with this sense that even though the main character is coming out of it a little bit bitter, a little bit jaded, there is still justice that is at work in the world, and that element, I would say, is through the one of the smaller characters, the detective Coggins, I think his name is. And then I would say another example that I love to pull from is In Darkness Cast by Jonathan Schweiger. It's back there. Where he places his anti-hero next to a paragon, right? So the two of them work off each other. Yes, I would agree. Iron Age Media says, I've not seen a lot of anti-heroes, but if there are, I generally see them as still enacting a fairly clear morality of some kind. There are a lot fewer just crazy people, right? If there's someone who is like a villain, not necessarily the villain of the story, but a villain, there's more of a morality built up for them structurally in the story. But yes, that's how I would say it's. There is like this spiritual component that places the story in some sort of moral code of some kind. Sometimes it's not very complicated. Sometimes it is more of an outright faith element. Very rarely, I would say, very rarely are there actual conversions, faith conversions, which is also an interesting element, because we're talking about a movement that is defying genres very much. One of the things that makes it difficult and unappealing to trad pub, there's not like a clear, well, we know that this genre appeals to this group. And as soon as you start talking about genuine faith of characters, it's harder to place stuff, right? Because it doesn't really belong in Christian fiction. But if we put it there, some people are going to be mad that there's blood and maybe some boobs, right? If we put it somewhere else, then someone who wasn't expecting the faith element might be surprised by that and not like it. So TradPub, that's one of the things that makes it difficult for TradPub. Hi, Flatfox Pro. Thank you for coming. All right. Real quick, I'm going to talk about some movement overlap. There were a lot of people who were, indie publishing before COVID, right? Before the movement became labeled and stuff. And they were already doing some similar things. That's why it's an age, right? It didn't necessarily start flash bang. Things led up to it. People were already doing some things that were similar. And so there's a little bit of overlap. Some of the people who were doing stuff pre-COVID are reluctant to tag themselves as Iron Age, but my perception of the movement, as a literary movement, is that because of the philosophical elements, they kind of fall under it. A couple of smaller movements that kind of fit this, one would be Pulp Rev. They're very entertainment focused in a very specific way, punchy, not a lot of world building. Not all of them, some of them did more. And then they were drawing an inspiration specifically from pulps and adventure stories and pre-1980s. And then another one would be the Superversive. Fiona Wolf was a big proponent of. She liked this. I don't know if it started with her. She's where I heard of it from. They are much more about the celebration of tropes and virtues and sort of the depiction of them as is, a lot more flat art type characters. So they have some similar, both of these movements have some similar elements to what I'm observing in Iron Age. Hail the lore, hi. William Jeffrey Rankin was one of the people who had an interesting question about the Iron Age this week. And I'm not going to read this whole thing. You guys should go and look at it yourselves. But his boiled down question was, is this anything beyond marketing? And of course, the ripoffers accused us of Iron Age just being just a label. And we've interacted with other volatile individuals who have similar things to say. What is Iron Age? Sure, it's a label, but it is a meaningful term. Authors can choose to identify with it. You can use it to network with like-minded creators, and hopefully we will be able to market with like-minded readers through it. I find it particularly useful in this discussion, right? Talking about the philosophical and other elements that I see as being similar among the stuff that I have reviewed, sort of, quantifying and clarifying for myself the trend that I see in the indie movement in general, indie publishing in general. But Iron Age, right, is describing something that's already happening in the trends and cultural ideals of art of the people who are making the cool stuff, right? Hi, C.A. Pence. Thank you for coming. So then I'm just going to mention a couple of things that we hear a lot. What is good? And then the Hug Club accusation. So my response to what is good would be to point back to the Iron Age emphasis on entertainment means that the priority is on did it entertain, and less on stylistic elements, craft techniques like we were talking. It's more about this zeitgeist, this philosophy of entertainment over messaging. And part of that goes back to my own ideals about escapism. For me, a story is good, right? And I review it if there's like the baseline, right, ability to read it. And then if the escapism was not hindered by anything within the story. That is a little bit, that's like a very, very high level like explanation. And then the accusation that we're a hug club, I would say is less about the movement as a philosophical concept and more about how people have applied their own convictions about the way that we interact with one another. This, for me, right, I don't review stuff that I don't like. So I believe in promoting the good stuff, elevating the good stuff, because there's already a ton of things that readers don't want to read, right? We don't need to say, well, don't read this. Like, I already had way more of that than I would ever need. I want to know what I should read. And then also, the bad stuff doesn't get aired like dirty laundry. We don't have drama over it. And then there's a supportive community for writers that are still developing their craft. That is the overall tone that people have within the Iron Age movement as it is applied, have decided to interact with one another. Iron Age Media says, I generally avoid the squabbles, but I commented the other day that I'm just tired of the look how crap this is routine with legacy media, and I would like it less with indies. I agree. With traditional, like trad media, right? Particularly movies, Marvel, Star Wars, that kind of stuff. There's all, like, they are doing marketing that puts it on the radar of consumers. And there is a place for commentators saying, don't waste your time, right? With indies, there isn't that understanding of the product that exists in a sort of like positive marketing sort of way. There isn't a flashy trailer that grabs their attention and says, oh, maybe this is something that I want to go and see, spend my money on, spend my time on. So saying, here's something you shouldn't spend your time on when they weren't already thinking about doing that, I don't see as very useful. But it would be good if we could avoid that kind of squabbling, as Iron Age Media was saying. Yeah, C.I. Pence says there isn't as much hype for indies. Hail the Lore mentions Razor Fist definition. Yep, works. I come from a different background, and so I'm talking about it in specifically a literary movement context. Any thoughts on centralized versus decentralized? I'm very much about decentralization. I'm going to get into that a little bit here. Because Matt Waterhouse had this tweet that sort of set off the conversations that we had this week about where is Iron Age going? Growing, evolving, innovation. Really interesting conversation. Lots of interesting points that were made. So mine is to encourage people to think smaller instead of trying to control the movement, right? Instead of picking people who are the leaders of the movement or saying, well, their opinion matters because they were there from the beginning, right? Or anything like that. Instead, focusing on developing your craft, your email list, your channel or blog or Substack or whatever. And then from there, utilizing that hashtag to find a few other people who are like-minded, right? And then partner with them. Each person bringing something to the table because they've developed email list, channels, blog, stuff. That way, in small groups, we can say, well, here is something that, an element that I think is important, right? If people feel like Pulp Rev does, that we need some sort of critical apparatus in order to define what is part of the group, right? Make a smaller group, call it whatever you want, and then have those criteria of what you're looking for and a way that you practically apply it. And the reason I say this is because when people are trying to control the movement, they say things like, someone should, you should, but they don't talk about like what they're going to do. Like, because it's a big group of creatives, everybody has their own thing that they're working on. They're already investing their time in it and money and energy in. So to try and control the movement by appointing sort of leaders is convenient, right? But what it ends up being is a few people who have a lot of like incentive to have opinions about things without like a lot of people who are under them who are not, their reach is limited. The idea of like being retweeted by a big creator or someone with a large platform is very, very appealing, right? It's got that same sort of appeal as getting picked up by a trad pub. But the spirit of independence, right, is something that's very important to me. I think it is what makes a lot of indies interesting, is the ideas, the independent thought, I'm going to do this even if nobody thinks it could go to market, right? I'm going to write it this way, even if that's not the way that people do it. So that's, my idea is to have it be on a smaller scale, people developing things on their own, and then working together with people who have also developed things on their own, doing projects like that, like book giveaways that then allow sharing of email addresses like across. I've seen a couple of these where if you buy the sale books, you get like a whole list of them, and then your email goes to all of those authors, right? So that kind of a thing where all of these people are coming together and bringing something to the table, that I think it has a lot more utility than big people benevolently saying, this was a good book, right? It would be better if those people could not also then say, this one was a bad book, you're banished from the group. And then you don't have anything because you didn't build anything on your own. So I know there are different opinions about centralization versus decentralization. I think going smaller is I think that is going to be a lot more practical and a lot more useful in the long run than trying to control the direction of the movement. Okay, going back a little ways, Doug Wise said, oh boy. Iron Age Media says, I second this PowerPoint slide. And he says, take notes, kids. Write that down. It'll be on the quiz, I bet. Patrick says, what, anarchy? No central planning means you'll just allow anything to come in and be decided on its own merits. You clearly need elites to choose winners. A great track record is clearly there. Obviously, he's being sarcastic. Iron Age Media says, as someone mainly just organizing projects and things, I find most people wanting to make it a group thing are looking to outsource their marketing work rather than trying to help onboard consumers. This is true. Yes. One of the difficult things about indie publishing is that you are responsible for your own marketing. And that is something that isn't going to go away. TradPub is struggling with it, sort of newly struggling with it. And it's a bummer. You kind of have to be a jack of all trades, but that's something that is a fact of life. And when I say think smaller, I don't mean like, hey, you have to do things that you weren't otherwise going to do, right? I mean that you should invest in those things that you should be doing anyway. And then in scaling up, partner with people who are also doing it so that there's nobody who's a hangers-on or trying to get a leg up by mooching off somebody else. I don't want to put it in such a way to say that people who do get promoted by big accounts are somehow bad people, right? Like, that's not what I'm saying. Like I said, if someone gets picked up by Trad Media, great. Good for them. They wrote something that made an impact. I think that's cool. But that shouldn't be what we're hanging our hat on. William Jeffrey Rankin says, or they prescribe solutions. Yep. Michael of St. Joseph says, I personally don't like identifying myself under most labels or umbrellas. I don't think the term is worthless, but open-ended online movements drift all over the place. Yes. But I do not think that this is so much a internet movement as much as it is a philosophical trend in the types of books that are being published independently. And that means that the elements of those trends can be identified. C.A. Pence says, also trading information on marketing and publishing is very useful. Yeah. And constructive criticism is important as well. Iron Age or not. Yes, I agree. I think that everyone should be seeking to better their craft. One of the things that I think is important for that is reading books. Whether it is from before 1980 or after, I think reading is important. I think that extensive reading is good for you. I think it's good for people who are seeking to create stories, as well as people who are not seeking to create stories, but are just going about their lives and are looking for entertainment. I think this is healthy. Obviously, I think there are books that are healthier than others. But I would not say that just baseline nonfiction is better, right? I would say fiction, particularly the speculative genres, are an important part of your reading diet. So as far as like trading constructive criticism, that's great. Like thinking small, right? You, as a creative, through the Iron Age hashtag, are finding a couple of other people who are not just Iron Age, but have a similar philosophy to you in particular, are like creating similar content or are doing something that you also think is worthwhile, good, worth emulating. You want to develop your craft in a similar direction. That what would be great would be to work together with them in some sort of mutually beneficial way. Trading information on marketing, publishing, doing like a book swap, creative criticism of each other's works, doing cross-promotional things. If you have, like, if you're working within a similar subgenre, stuff like that. Just thinking a little bit smaller, how can we work together now that we know that we have a similar literary philosophy, greater worldview philosophy, in such a way that is building up a small, localized branch, right, of a greater literary movement, rather than trying to control everyone who wants to say that they're part of Iron Age. Okay, that is all that I had to say. This is my usual end slide. Help support indies. Try alternatives, indie alternatives to mainstream media. Leave reviews. Comment on this video your indie recommendations, or if you have a particular sci-fi fantasy subgenre you would like me to talk about indie alternatives for. And let me know what you think about talking about Iron Age as a literary movement, sort of in the context of other literary philosophical movements. I think that putting it in that context makes it a little bit less of a like internet, very fluid thing that's going to crumble and fall apart, and more of a thing that is already happening. And we are simply observing this phenomenon and giving it a name. Iron Age Media says, I was also complaining about how hard it is to get reviews. I wish more authors would review each other's works. I think it would be helpful. Yes, I agree. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, reviews are critical. And I always say, it doesn't have to be super, super in-depth. And you can just say something like, I liked the book, right? And one thing that Patrick actually talked about recently online, on Twitter, I think it was, he said, you don't have to be like me, where you only do stuff that you review positively. Because, like Fiona Wolf says, a lot of times a negative review talks about something and she goes, oh, that fits me perfectly, right? So you don't have to feel like you can only do positive stuff. And I'm talking like on Amazon or Goodreads, right? I'm not saying like on Twitter, be like, well, I hated this, right? Because I'm very much in support of the positive promoting stuff that we like. But it can be helpful on Amazon and on Goodreads and places where a reader is going, should I read this particular book that has already been brought to my attention? And this is because I see reviews as being for readers, right? They are helpful for authors in a myriad of ways, but the reason that algorithms care, right, about how many reviews you have and stuff like that, is because readers care. So in order to help more readers, review books. Just doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to say a whole lot. Obviously, I think Amazon has a minimum character run, right? But it doesn't have to be something where you summarize it or anything. You just say, I liked the setting. I liked the characters. I liked that there was a dog, right? Like, that's all you need to do. Iron Age Media says, yeah, I agree. In my opinion, the core ideas I've espoused for the Iron Age have been going on for years in multiple mediums. People are hyperventilating about the movement. They are missing the forest for the trees. I agree. Okay, guys, thank you so much for coming and listening to me talk about my opinions here. I would appreciate hearing back from you guys about what you think. And if you think there are elements to the movement that I've forgotten or left out, or if you think I'm wrong, bring it on. And as always, you can find long-form positive reviews of indie, sci-fi, and fantasy at periapsispress.com. Test is on next Friday when our finals. And again, PowerPoint is for my own sanity. Otherwise, I go off the rails and then I can't get back. Seriously, it's bad. All right. Thank you guys so much for coming. I hope you have a great week.